Her daughter handed her a broom during her own engagement party. Helen Ford, homeowner since 1979, didn't flinch. Evan, the soon-to-be son-in-law, smirked and asked if she knew where the dustpan was. By the next week, his name would trigger legal alerts and Cassie's dreams of ownership would be auctioned to reality. Helen had spent decades preserving that home. Now she was protecting it. And when they tried to claim it again, the deed would be waiting with a different name on the line. Before we begin, may I ask where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The garden shimmered beneath a canopy of fairy lights, their warm glow flickering off champagne flutes and sequin dresses. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable in the background, almost drowned out by the laughter and chatter. The scent of fresh-cut roses Helen still held in the humid summer air, even if no one paused long enough to notice them. Cassie was mid-laugh when she turned to Helen and snapped her fingers, sharp and casual, like she was hailing a waiter. "Mom," she said brightly. Her voice sugar-dipped for the guests. "Could you grab this?" A broom appeared in her manicured hand, like it had always been meant for someone else to hold. Without waiting for a response, she passed it off to Helen with the confidence of someone assigning a chore, not asking a favor. Evan, half listening, half performing for the small cluster of real estate buddies behind him, chuckled and added, "You know where the dustpan is, right?" He didn't even glance in her direction when he said it. Helen looked at the broom for half a second. Then, she took it. Not because she had Tobit, because her hands needed something to do that wasn't clenching. The bristles made a soft, rustling sound as she swept under the appetizer table. A few napkins had blown loose. Someone had dropped a toothpick near the garden bed. She moved slowly, deliberately, each stroke more methodical than the last, like she was cleaning up something older than tonight. Mrs. Alden, adjusting her trays near the buffet, froze mid-motion when she caught sight of Helen stooped over the broom. Her brow furrowed, eyes wide with something between disbelief and pity. She didn't say anything, just held Helen's gaze a beat too long, then looked away. Helen kept sweeping. Behind her, a guest complimented the string lights. Another mentioned how lovely the centerpieces were, white peonies with tiny sprigs of rosemary, a trick Helen had learned 20 years ago working weddings down by Lake Kiowa. No one asked where the idea had come from. No one looked her way. A tap on her shoulder came, just as she was coaxing a dead leaf from under a folding chair. "Honey, stop," Joanne whispered. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene, but there was something hot and sharp in her tone. Helen straightened slowly. Her knees didn't like the movement. "You're not staff," Joanne said. "They forgot who planted the roots here." Helen's lips pressed into something that wasn't quite a smile. "It's just a leaf," she said quietly. "It's not just a damn leaf, and you know it." The two women stood there for a moment, Helen holding the broom, Joanne clutching her purse like it might keep her from lunging at someone. The sound of cutlery clinking on plates floated past them. A toast began somewhere near the fire pit, but neither of them turned to listen. Cassie's laugh louder now pealed across the yard like wind chimes in a storm. "Come sit," Joanne said, nodding toward the back porch. "In a minute." Joanne hesitated, then patted Helen's arm and walked away, muttering something about iced tea and low blood pressure. Helen returned to the broom, but this time she didn't move. She just stood there, surrounded by the garden she had planted bulb by bulb, season after season. The string lights buzzed faintly above her. From the far end of the yard, Lena watched. She wasn't in a dress like the rest of the girls, just jeans and a black blouse. Her hair was pulled back tight, her eyes narrowed. She leaned against the oak tree Helen had planted the year Cassie turned 10, the one with the tire swing no one used anymore. She saw everything. Helen caught her granddaughter's gaze for just a second, just long enough to see the flicker of something. Not pity, not confusion, understanding. Then the music shifted again, this time something loud and celebratory. Evan raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he called out. Helen turned her head slowly, taking in the crowd, the laughter, the lights, and the future everyone seemed so sure they were entitled to. She placed the broom against the side of the porch and wiped her hands on her slacks. Inside, in the hallway where no one was watching, the house deed still sat in its manila folder, untouched, unphotographed, unknown to all of them. But not for long. The morning after the party, Helen sat at the kitchen table with the kind of stillness that made clocks seem louder. The overhead fan turned lazily above her, the old brass chain clinking now and then like a reminder of how long it had hung there, unchanged. The faint smell of last night's votive candles lingered near the back door. In front of her, laid open like scripture, was the property deed. Her name. Only her name. She traced it with the tip of her finger, slow and deliberate. Not out of sentiment, but out of confirmation. In all their talk of our home and our future, no one had mentioned this document. Not even once. She reached into the side drawer beneath the table and pulled out a slim, leather-bound folio her will. The spine crackled as she opened it, like the pages themselves resented being disturbed. Two names stared back at her in clean legal print. She stared at them for a long moment, then picked up a pencil and drew a single, diagonal line through each. The graphite scratched softly. Then silence. Outside, birds argued in the crepe myrtle tree near the front window. Helen closed the folio and set it aside. Her hand lingered near the pencil for a moment longer before she withdrew it, fingers curling around her coffee mug instead. Her phone buzzed once then again. She turned it over. A notification. Evan Grant posted, "Feeling blessed. Excited to start building our forever home. One memory at a time. KP. Number, grateful number, new beginnings." The caption was paired with a filtered photo from the party. In it, Cassie stood beside Evan, her head tilted toward his shoulder, smiling like the future was something guaranteed. Behind them, blurred by the camera's shallow focus, stood Helen's hydrangeas and the screened-in porch she had painted herself 3 summers ago. "Building," she murmured. The word felt absurd in her mouth, like someone else's shoes she had no business trying on. A gentle knock came from the back screen door, followed by the slow creak as it opened just wide enough for Joanne to slip through. "You up?" Joanne asked, already answering her own question. "Coffee still hot," Helen said, nodding toward the pot. Joanne poured a half cup, then sat without ceremony. Her eyes flicked to the paperwork on the table. "I saw Evan's post," she said. No need to explain further. "He's building on paper that isn't his." Helen didn't answer. She didn't have to. "Time to call Baxter?" Joanne added, her voice lower now. Helen's hand closed around the folded edge of the will. "This afternoon," she said, quietly. Joanne gave a firm nod, then took a sip of coffee and grimaced. "You still buy that off-brand stuff?" Helen almost smiled. The door to the hallway opened with a small creak, and Lena stepped in, socked feet quiet on the hardwood floor. She looked between the two women, clocked the papers, the half-spoken tension, and slid onto the bench next to Helen. "Mom says we're switching rooms after the wedding," Lena said, eyes on the steam rising from the coffee mug. "That true?" Helen didn't flinch. "Did she now?" she replied, voice soft but unreadable. Lena shrugged. "She said I'd get the back room since you probably wouldn't need it anymore. Said you'd be spending more time. Out, whatever that means." Joanne raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Helen reached for Lena's hand under the table, gave it a quiet squeeze. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart." The girl nodded once, expression unreadable, then leaned her shoulder gently against Helen's. Joanne stood. "Well, I'll let you two talk," she said, grabbing her mug. "You call Baxter. I'll be on the porch if you want backup." As the door clicked shut behind her, Helen picked up the phone and scrolled until she found the old number, Baxter, Leland, and Ford, attorneys at law. Mr. Baxter had retired from high-profile estate law years ago, but kept a small, quiet practice out of loyalty and boredom. She tapped call. It rang once, twice, then. "Baxter here," came the familiar voice, steady as ever. Helen didn't wait for pleasantries. "I need to discuss a private transaction. No one else is to know. Can you come this week?" There was a pause. "I can be there Thursday," he said. "Good," Helen replied. "Use the side door." She hung up. Lena, still leaning against her, whispered, "Are you mad?" "No," Helen said, eyes fixed on the deed in front of her. "I'm awake." And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like it was standing on memory. It felt like it was standing on choice. The brunch was smaller than the engagement party tighter circle, trendier guests, fewer chairs. Everything was white linen and curated ease, the kind of casual that took 3 vendors and a spreadsheet to execute. Mimosa glasses clinked. Shrimp skewers rotated neatly on ceramic trays. There was a signature juice blend with rosemary sprigs floating in it. Helen had made the centerpiece arrangements that morning. Cassie hadn't said thank you. She was standing near the mimosa bar now, wrapped in a pale pink wrap dress that cost more than Helen's monthly pension. Evan stood beside her, gesturing with an open hand as a small knot of guests leaned in. One woman nodded too enthusiastically. A man in sunglasses complimented the charm of the house. Helen stood near the kitchen archway, one foot in the room, the other already out. "Let's raise a glass," Evan said suddenly, his voice confident and polished. "To good company and great beginnings." Glasses lifted, though no one seemed sure if that was the official toast or just a warm-up. He smiled, then added, "We're hoping this house becomes the forever place, a home to grow old in, raise a family, build something lasting." There were murmurs of approval. Someone said, "Cheers to that." Another clapped lightly. Helen didn't raise her glass. She hadn't been offered one. She turned and walked quietly back toward the catering table, where Mrs. Alden was stacking used ramekins with a pace that suggested impatience, barely concealed by professionalism. "You holding up?" she asked without looking up. Helen slipped a folded bill into the woman's apron pocket. "Double for you. You shouldn't have to pretend with people like this." Mrs. Alden stopped mid-stack and looked her in the eye. "You raised her better than this." Helen's smile was brittle. "I raised her. What she became wasn't mine." From the living room, laughter erupted. Cassie's voice in the center of it, as always. Helen picked up an empty platter and began clearing. She didn't ask. She didn't want the optics. She just wanted to move. In the hallway, she passed Lena. The girl was halfway up the stairs, her phone loosely in hand. She looked like she'd been frozen in place. Helen paused. "You okay?" Lena blinked. "I just heard Mom." Helen waited. "She was talking to one of the brunch girls," said. Lena hesitated. "She said you're the oldest part of the house, like you're some kind of antique fixture." For a moment, Helen didn't respond. She stared past Lena, toward the upstairs hallway. The walls up there still held faint shadows where old family photos used to hang. The ones Cassie had taken down to update the vibe. "I see," Helen said finally. Lena started to say something else, but Helen just touched her arm gently, a signal to let it go. In the laundry room, tucked behind a box of winter linens, Helen kept an old metal file box, the kind with a rusted clasp and curled paper labels. She pulled it out that evening after the last guest had left, when Cassie was off taking photos with the brunch leftovers for Instagram, and Evan was pretending to review financial spreadsheets at the dining table. She opened the box and pulled out a pre-addressed change of mail form. The envelope was crisp, never used. She had filled it out once before, but never mailed it back when Cassie's first marriage started falling apart, and Helen thought maybe she should give them space. This time, she slid in a fresh form, wrote her name cleanly. Poe Box 7413. Not a huge change, just enough. A quiet wall between her and whatever plans they thought they were entitled to build around her. She sealed the envelope, pressed the flap shut with a firm line of her thumb, and set it on the entry table. "Heading out?" Cassie called from the other room. Helen didn't answer, just picked up her keys. As she passed the staircase, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, the same one she'd hung in that spot 40 years ago, before Cassie had her first tooth. She studied herself, the lines near her mouth, the steadiness in her shoulders. Cassie's voice floated in again. "We're thinking of redoing the guest room. Evan says it feels dated." Helen turned, stepped out into the early dusk, and pulled the door closed behind her with a soft click. On the table inside, under the filtered glow of string lights still half hung from last night, the envelope waited, quiet, unopened. And tomorrow, it would move without asking permission. Helen came home to silence, the kind that wasn't peaceful, just hollow. The front door, usually sticking just enough to announce her return, opened too easily. Inside, the air felt unnaturally crisp, like someone had thrown open all the windows and let the memory out. She stopped in the foyer. The entry table was missing. So was the blue and white ceramic bowl that had sat on it for 30 years, where keys, mail, and the occasional paperclip used to land without ceremony. In its place, a narrow glass console with a fake succulent and a tray of lavender-scented sachets. She moved further in. The family room had been rearranged. The oak side table Evan once called stuffy was gone. The framed quilt square that Helen's mother had stitched boxed. The walls had been repainted a sterile, impersonal shade of eggshell latte. The room didn't smell like lemonwood polish anymore. It smelled like new paint and ambition. Her heels clicked against the floor louder than usual. The click of an outsider. Voices drifted from upstairs. "Make sure you get the bay window from this angle," Cassie said. "It's the hero shot." Helen stepped quietly onto the staircase and saw them Cassie, in a blazer and jeans, standing beside a photographer with a wide-angle lens. Evan was next to her, pointing like a developer on a job site. "We can crop the hallway tighter," he said. "It's about selling the feel, not the family." Helen turned and headed back down, her hands fists before she even realized. In the dining room, the old oak cabinet stood bare. The wedding china was gone. So was the silver tea set from her grandmother, the one with a tiny dent in the sugar spoon from decades of use. Her breath caught. She opened the hallway closet. A stack of boxes labeled "Upstairs Decor Staging" sat on the floor. She reached for the top one, pulled back the flaps, and stared into it like it might bite. There it was, her grandmother's mirror. The one with the scalloped edge and worn brass frame. The one Helen had watched her mother hang the day they moved in. It had always lived on the upstairs landing wall right outside the guest bedroom. No one had ever questioned that. She heard footsteps behind her. Cassie didn't look guilty. She never did. "Oh," she said too brightly. "You're back early. We were just finishing up the shoot." Helen didn't move. Cassie glanced down at the box. "I meant to tell you we took the mirror down. It didn't really match the aesthetic we're going for." Helen said nothing. She reached into the box, gently pulled the mirror out, and held it in both hands like something sacred. She didn't say a word, didn't look at Cassie. She turned and walked upstairs. By the time she reached the top of the landing, her arms were trembling slightly, but the mirror was steady. She rehung it, using the original hook that hadn't been removed, as if even Cassie had known better than to erase all traces of it. She stood there for a moment, looking into the mirror, seeing nothing but her own reflection in behind her, the soft blur of change she hadn't asked for. Downstairs, a car door slammed. Joanne's voice carried from the driveway. "You gonna tell me what in fresh hell is going on with this furniture shuffle?" Helen stepped out onto the porch just as Joanne approached, sunglasses low on her nose, lips pursed tight. "They're staging the house," Helen said, her voice even. "Photos, listings, buzz." Joanne looked past her into the house. "They're staging," she muttered. "But they forgot who holds the deed." Helen gave a slow nod, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Time to move ahead," she said, dialing. The line clicked once, then, "Baxter." "It's Helen," she said. "Let's proceed with the transfer." Quietly, but swiftly. She hung up before he could ask questions. Inside the house, Cassie's laughter floated faintly down the stairs, too bright for a room that didn't belong to her. Helen closed the front door with a soft thud and locked it. Not out of fear, out of finality. In the upstairs hallway, the mirror reflected light again for now. The office smelled faintly of lemon balm and old paper-like secrets pressed into folders and kept in orderly rows. Helen sat across from Mr. Baxter, who hadn't changed much in 20 years, except for a slight lean in his posture and the deeper creases beneath his eyes. He slid the contract across the desk without commentary, just the way she liked it. The buyer's name was at the top in smooth print. Madeline C. Rhodes. Helen remembered her well, another widow from the garden club, sharp as shears and twice as exacting. They'd once swapped rosemary clippings over a conversation about ground cover and ungrateful children. Madeline had made her money in eco-restoration, bought up heritage homes and preserved them. Quietly. Permanently. Helen picked up the pen. "Temporary occupancy clause is locked in," Baxter said. "You retain full rights to the guest suite, access to the garden, and a standing renewal every 2 years. No loopholes." Helen didn't nod. She just signed, one stroke at a time. "Do they know?" Baxter asked. "No," Helen said simply. "They think inheritance is a given. They've never asked to read a thing." Baxter gave a low, amused exhale. "It's always the ones who assume they'll be handed everything." Helen tucked the signed copy into her purse, folded neatly between her checkbook and a printout of a peach cobbler recipe Lena had given her. Back home, Helen stepped through the kitchen and heard the soft hum of discussion upstairs. Paint swatches, Cassie said. He's bringing a sample board by Thursday. Helen climbed the stairs slowly, letting the words settle in like dust on wood. When she reached the hallway, Evan stood by the bedroom door with a tape measure, notebook open, his shirt untucked like he belonged. Going for the sage green, he said to Cassie, who twirled a curtain sample between two fingers. Feels calm, timeless. Helen didn't pause. She walked past them both without comment, her own measuring tape looped around her wrist. Cassie looked up. Are you redecorating something? No, Helen replied, voice steady. Just checking dimensions. Evan blinked. For what? Helen didn't answer. She opened the guest suite door and stepped in, taking silent note of the window width, the closet depth, the space between the armoire and the corner lamp. She scribbled nothing, just absorbed, memorized. Lena appeared in the hallway as Helen exited. She tilted her head curiously. Grandma? Yes, sweetheart? Are you moving? Helen met her eyes, steady, gentle, unbending. No, she said softly. They are. Lena said nothing, but her gaze flicked to Evan, now distracted by his phone, and Cassie, already flipping through a design book with a look of false confidence. She understood more than she said. Later that evening, Helen stood at the back of the house, the garden wrapped in golden dusk. Madeline's car idled at the curb, engine quiet, silver paint catching the fading sun. The windows were tinted, discreet, just like everything else about this deal. Madeline rolled it down halfway. The transfer will post Monday. You'll get the confirmation papers by end of next week. Helen nodded. Thank you for keeping it private. I don't do drama, Madeline said. Just gardens, and good paperwork. Helen gave a faint smile. You'll like this one, soil's good, roots go deep. Madeline tipped 2 fingers to her temple and drove off without another word. Helen turned back to the porch. Cassie's laughter burst from the open window. Evan wants to replace the floor scan, you imagine? Helen let the screen door creak shut behind her and walked into the kitchen where the measuring tape still lay coiled beside a used mug. She picked it up, looped it around her wrist again, and looked down the hall to the guest suite, the space she had just claimed as her own. Permanently, legally, quietly. Outside, the porch light flickered on. The house looked peaceful, lived in, owned. And in the upstairs hallway, Evan's voice echoed faintly. Once we get this place fully updated, it's going to double in value. Helen opened the drawer beside her, pulled out the sealed manila envelope from Baxter, and placed it gently on the center of the kitchen table. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The house already wasn't theirs. They just didn't know it yet. The morning sun hadn't even warmed the siding when Helen's phone buzzed. At Cassie, Glow Up Life posted, turning our family home into something modern and timeless. Grateful for the love and the space to dream. Number, before and after, number design journey, number Grant Ford House. Below it was a carousel of filtered images, Cassie barefoot on the porch steps in a flowy linen dress, Evan pointing at blueprints like he was breaking ground on a legacy. The last photo was a close-up of Helen's hydrangeas in bloom, captioned, "Even old roots can support new life." Helen stared at the screen until it dimmed. She didn't click like, she didn't comment. Instead, she placed her phone on the table, turned to the window, and watched a blue truck pull into the driveway. A man stepped out with a clipboard tucked under his arm and a rolled-up set of architectural plans in hand. He had the look of someone expecting to speak to the owners. Helen opened the door before he could knock. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice pleasant, neutral. "Here to meet Evan Grant," the man said. "Got some drafts for the master suite reno." Helen blinked once. "Ah, that won't be necessary." He laughed, awkward. "Oh, no worries. Evan told me to swing by with the specs. We'll just need a walkthrough to finalize." Helen stepped onto the porch, closing the door gently behind her. "The house isn't available for renovations." The contractor frowned. "Sorry, aren't you, Helen?" "I am." "Then you must know we're just adding value. No demo, just enhancements. Floor plan expansion, new master bath, recessed lighting." "I understand," she said. "But the house isn't available. Not to Evan. Not to you." His brow furrowed. Ma'am, he said he lives here. Helen didn't blink. Living somewhere and owning it are two very different things. He stood silent, unsure whether to argue or leave. I suggest you contact Mr. Baxter. Any further planning or misrepresentation could put your license in legal jeopardy. Her tone never lifted. Not once, but it cut all the same. The man took a small step back. I'll follow up. You do that. He left without another word. Helen stood still on the porch long after the truck backed out of the drive. Across the yard, Joanne leaned on her cane, arms crossed, watching from her perch on a cushioned rocker. That's you shooing off another one? She called. Helen didn't answer right away, just exhaled slowly. He said he had plans. Plans are for people who ask first, Joanne said, squinting. They brought this on themselves, you know. Built a castle on a foundation they didn't pour. Helen gave a small nod. Not my job to hold up the scaffolding. Joanne raised her tea glass in a slow salute. Damn right it's not. Inside, Helen sat down at the kitchen table and picked up the manila envelope again, her fingers resting on its edge. By noon, Baxter had already sent the cease and desist to Evans' brokerage. The subject line was cold and perfect. Unauthorized development planning. Immediate halt required. Helen didn't need to read the whole letter. She knew what it said. Knew the line Evan would read with a clenched jaw. No party shall pursue alterations, improvements, or claims upon property no longer under their legal purview. Let them find out in legalese. She poured herself a fresh cup of tea, the steam curling upward like breath she didn't have to hold anymore. Lena appeared in the doorway, holding a small cardboard box. I found this in the pantry, she said. Your favorite. The lavender blend with the little rosebuds. Helen looked at the box, then at her granddaughter's face untroubled, but not naive. Lena sat beside her, sliding the tea box onto the table. So, what now? Helen looked out the window. The hydrangeas were still blooming, even after being paraded on Cassie's social feed like decoration. They belonged to the soil, not the spotlight. She turned to Lena. Now? Helen said. Now we let them try to catch up. And upstairs, unaware, Cassie was already texting a new contractor. Unaware, Evan was already drafting an email marked urgent. And unaware, both of them were planning for a future that didn't exist anymore. The invitation came by text. Family dinner tonight. Just us. 7 p.m. No phones at the table. Mom. Cassie rolled her eyes when she read it, then tapped back a thumbs up. Evan replied with a check mark. Lena said nothing but showed up early to help set the table. Helen didn't make a big fuss. She reheated a casserole she'd frozen weeks ago and pulled out the real napkins linen, the kind you fold in thirds without fanfare. A pitcher of iced tea. 1 bottle of wine. No centerpiece, just space and intention. They sat down around the oak table with the same arrangement they always had, Helen at the head, Cassie to her right, Evan across, Lena on the end near the window. Joanne arrived 5 minutes late and brought peach cobbler, like always, then took the seat closest to Helen and dropped her handbag with an audible thud. It wasn't tension that filled the room. It was curiosity, Evan feigning politeness, Cassie absently scrolling under the table, Lena watching everyone like a silent jury. Joanne just waited. She already knew what was coming. Helen didn't bother with appetizers or pleasantries. She let everyone get a few bites in. Then, quietly, she reached into the manila folder on the floor beside her chair and placed a white business card in the center of the table. Thought you all should meet the new owner, she said. Cassie glanced at it, squinting. Who is Madeline Rhodes? She's the woman who bought this house. Evan barked a laugh, like it was a performance and he'd finally found his line. Bought it? What are you talking about? Helen took her time. She reached in again, pulled out a stapled document, and laid it gently beside the card. Deed transfer. Signed. Notarized. Final. Cassie's fork froze midair. This isn't real. Oh, it's very real, Helen said. Madeline and I signed the contract last week. Transfer finalized Monday. Evan leaned forward, scanning the signature. Number. This is a joke. You're trying to scare us. Helen tilted her head, calm as a lake in winter. Number. The joke was thinking it was yours to begin with. He stood up abruptly, pacing. You're telling me you sold the house we live in? No, Helen said, sipping her tea. I sold the house I own. You live in it. That was always the difference. Cassie's face had gone sheet white. You can't just do that without telling us. Without. Helen raised a single hand. I didn't have to tell you. That's how ownership works. Not everyone gets a vote. Joanne clinked her fork against her glass gently. To title holders, she said, voice crisp and dry. God bless 'em. Lena hadn't moved. Her eyes never left the documents. You're staying, though, right? She asked quietly. Helen turned toward her. Yes, I arranged to rent the guest suite from Madeline indefinitely. I'll have my own entrance, my own space. Cassie scoffed. So we're tenants? You're squatters if you don't adjust quickly, Joanne muttered. Evan turned, pointing. This is insane. We were planning renovations, improvements. This was going to be our... Your what? Helen asked. Legacy? Project? Investment? She let the word linger like ash in the air. You took down my mother's mirror, she said evenly. Called me the oldest part of the house. You staged my life out of the frame. So I framed something else. Cassie stood, fingers trembling around her cloth napkin. You're seriously doing this? I've done it. No. One spoke. The air had shifted. The walls seemed to listen. Evan's eyes darted toward the deed again, as if maybe something in the fine print might save him. But there was nothing there. Just signatures, ink, authority. Helen stood and collected the folder, the card, the silence. She walked it back to her room and shut the door behind her with the same grace she'd always used. In the dining room, Cassie's shoulders stiffened. Evan reached for his wine. Lena stayed seated, eyes still on the spot where the card had been. Joanne picked up her fork and dug into the cobbler. Well? She said around a bite. They wanted an open concept lifestyle. Her smirk lingered as she went back for seconds. And upstairs, Helen opened her window, letting in the night breeze finally, on her terms. Evan's voice carried through the paper-thin walls that Sunday morning, frantic, low, but sharp enough to cut through the silence, like a blade dragged across tile. I don't care what she signed, he hissed into the phone. Find me an angle. Quiet occupancy rights, inheritance expectation, adverse possession something. Helen stood in the laundry room, folding dish towels with slow, methodical care. She wasn't eavesdropping. She just wasn't interrupting him either. Yeah, I get it's her name, Evan continued, pacing. But she let us live here. That has to count for something. A pause. Well, yeah. I'm not on the Dido you think I'd be calling if I was. Another pause. Louder sigh. Fine. Let me know. Today. He hung up. The floorboards creaked as he stomped upstairs like a man climbing a ladder with no roof to land on. By that afternoon, Baxter had already responded. A manila envelope arrived in Helen's mailbox, bearing only 2 pages own stapled, one loose. She read them at the kitchen counter, then left the packet where Evan would find it, tucked neatly between the salt shaker and the unpaid internet bill. By dinner time, Cassie was sitting at the foot of the stairs with the letter trembling in her hands. It says we have no legal claim, she said quietly, reading it aloud like maybe the words would change the second time through. No tenancy rights, no entitlement, nothing. She looked up. Is that true? Helen stirred the pot on the stove, unbothered. That's what it says, doesn't it? Cassie blinked fast. You could have warned us, given us time to adjust. I gave you time, Helen said. You used it to order flooring samples. Cassie moved to stand, then stopped. What if we just stay upstairs, just the second floor? It doesn't have to be a fight. We can coexist. Helen turned to face her, slowly. You left me the garden hose and a broom at your engagement party. You'll be lucky if I leave you the air. Cassie flinched, as if the words themselves landed heavy. From the back porch, a voice called gently, knock knock. Madeline Rhodes stepped inside without waiting. She was dressed in practical khakis and a green linen blouse, her silver hair pulled back with purpose. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a woman who got things done without having to prove anything. Miss Ford, she said, smiling. I just wanted to say hello. Final walkthrough's complete. Everything looks just as we hoped. Helen stepped forward, wiping her hands on a dishcloth before shaking Madeline's. Glad you stopped by, she said warmly. Everything's holding up? Better than expected, Madeline said, glancing around. Your care shows. You staying in the guest suite will keep the place grounded. I'm glad you stayed. Cassie rose slowly. You're her? The buyer? Madeline offered a polite, if dismissive, nod. That's right. And you are? Her daughter. Madeline's eyes softened with professional sympathy. Then I hope you understand what a gift this home has been for years, and what a gift it still is. As of now, it's a property I intend to preserve, quietly. Evan appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand on the railing, expressions stormy. So that's it? That's it, Madeline replied. Unless you'd like to discuss a formal rental agreement, which I don't recommend. She turned to Helen again. I'll be by with the keys for the external suite door Tuesday. No rush. Helen nodded. Tuesday's fine. Madeline gave a small wave, turned, and walked out as efficiently as she came. The silence she left behind was thick. Cassie collapsed onto the couch like her spine had been pulled out. We don't even have a place lined up. Maybe, Helen said, returning to the stove. You should post about that. See if your followers can recommend something modern and timeless. Lena appeared in the doorway, a worn puzzle box in her hands. Still want to do the porch tonight? She asked Helen. Helen glanced toward the back door. Let's light the citronella first. As they stepped outside, Cassie remained frozen in the living room, lips parted, eyes wide. Evan turned his back and slowly walked upstairs, not to a bedroom, but to a borrowed space, one that, by next week, would be a memory in search of a floor plan. The thumb drive was wrapped in a pale pink hair, tithe kind Lena wore around her wrists, always slightly stretched and dusted with lint. She slid it across the table after dinner. No ceremony, no explanation. Helen looked at it, then at her granddaughter's face. You sure I need to see this? Lena nodded, lips pressed tight. I didn't want to show you. I've had it since the day after the party, but you should know. Helen took it wordlessly, rose from the table, and walked down the hall toward her bedroom. The door clicked shut behind her with the weight of inevitability. She plugged the drive into the small laptop she kept in her armoire. It blinked awake. One file. No title. Just a timestamp. 2025-06, -02_11 to 43. MP4. She clicked. The video was shaky. Someone filming casually with a phone from behind a hedge. Helen recognized the scene instantly, the engagement party, before sunset. Cassie stood near the mimosa bar, surrounded by two women with matching blowouts and oversized sunglasses. The camera zoomed in as Evan walked off screen. Cassie leaned in conspiratorially, sipping from a champagne flute. Mom's somewhere out back, I think, she said, laughing. Probably watering something emotionally symbolic. One of the women smirked. She's so quiet. I thought she was staff at first. Cassie waved a manicured hand. Please. She's basically a living lamp at this point. Looks nice. Doesn't make noise. Just kind of sits there. Laughter. I mean, she added with a mock shrug, every historic home has a fixture you don't really use anymore. Helen paused the video. The still frame froze on Cassie mid-laugh, her teeth bared in a way that made her look unfamiliar. Younger. Crueler. Helen sat there for a long moment, unmoving. Then she closed the laptop, ejected the drive, and set it down on the dresser next to a small ceramic bird Lena had made in second grade. It had been cracked once and glued back together. Joanne knocked once before walking in. I saw Lena leave your room like she was carrying a ghost, she said, lowering herself into the armchair near the window. Helen didn't answer. Joanne looked at the drive, then at Helen. So she knows, she said quietly. And now you do too. Helen's voice was even. She called me a lamp. Joanne raised an eyebrow. I once got called a relic by my nephew. You know what I did? What? Cut him out of my Christmas list and outlived his houseplants. Helen let out a sound that was nearly a laugh. Joanne leaned forward, her voice sharper now. People who treat elders like furniture don't deserve four walls. You gave her roots and rain and sun, and she built a stage on top of it. Helen looked out the window at the garden. Her garden. Nothing had been trimmed this week, and still it bloomed, orderly chaos, held together by care. She stood. She walked to the armoire and opened the drawer where the will sat, still in the same leather folio, still creased along the middle from where she'd folded it too often. She opened it and pulled a pen from the drawer. The ink was slow, deliberate. A new name. in confident, blue strokes. Lena Ford, sole beneficiary. She dated it, initialed the margin, folded it again. This time, it didn't feel like correction. It felt like clarity. The next morning, Helen stood on the porch as the sun broke low across the yard. The thumb drive sat in a small clay bowl beside her rocking chair. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't need to explain. She didn't need to defend. Inside, Cassie and Evan were still asleep, or pretending to be. Lena stepped out barefoot, a mug in her hands. "You okay?" she asked. Helen nodded. "I'm better than okay." She looked at her granddaughter, at the quiet steadiness in her posture, the absence of entitlement in her gaze. "Funny thing about lamps," Helen said. "They still hold light. They just need someone worth shining it on." Lena smiled softly. From inside the house, a phone vibrated with another notification. A new listing. A missed call. Something urgent. But out here, nothing rushed. Nothing needed validation. Helen looked back at the door, then at Lena. "Let's prune the zinnias today," she said. "I want the roots strong before fall." Lena nodded. "I'll get the gloves." The screen door shut behind them, and the thumb drive remained, untouched. Truth, at rest. The invitation was meant to look effortless, an elegant spring garden party to celebrate the season and fresh starts. Cassie used a watercolor font and soft pink cardstock, printed through a site that let you track RSVPs like stock prices. "Can you help with the guest list?" she asked Helen, standing in the kitchen with a tablet in one hand and a smug glass of kombucha in the other. "I figure we can divide and conquer, so it feels inclusive." Helen smiled, polite as a prayer. "Happy to help." Cassie didn't notice the look Lena gave her across the room. Or maybe she saw it and chose to ignore it, like the pile of unopened mail from Baxter still sitting by the door. By Wednesday, Helen had quietly reclaimed the paper list and the envelopes. She tucked Cassie's version in the recycling bin beneath yesterday's shredded kale wrapper and brought out her address book, the old one, with worn corners and notes in pencil beside names. "Lost husband in '08. Still loves deviled eggs. Nice to Lena at the bake sale." She started writing. "Mrs. Alden. The Harrisons from next door. Lena's biology teacher, Miss Ross. The twins from the community garden. Joanne, of course, with a +1 even though she'd never bring one." She left out Cassie's influencer friends, the local wedding planner with a podcast, the real estate photographer with a drone, and the girl with 60K followers who once called the porch swing a bit too Cracker Barrel. She mailed the invites herself, hand-canceled at the post office. Neat, centered stamps. The night before the party, Evan found the RSVP sheet on the kitchen counter and held it like it had insulted him personally. "Where's Carly with an I?" he asked. "Where's Jax? What happened to Tiff and her husband, the wine rep?" Cassie leaned over, squinting. "Wait, where's any of them?" Helen glanced over her glasses. "I thought you said you wanted a celebration with people who matter." "These people matter." Evan's jaw tightened. "You can't just rewrite our list." Helen folded a napkin, slow and clean. "My address. My stamp." Cassie turned to Lena, half laughing. "Did you know about this?" Lena shrugged. "She asked me who I thought was kind." The next morning, the backyard bloomed under soft sunlight and a canopy of wisteria. The tablecloths were linen, borrowed from Joanne. The tea sandwiches came from Mrs. Alden's daughter. The music was a soft jazz playlist Lena had made, and the scent of fresh-cut roses drifted through the air. Helen's roses in full, unapologetic bloom. Neighbors trickled in first, bearing homemade scones and lemon bars. Miss Ross brought Lena a book on forensic science. The Harrisons hugged Helen like they'd missed her. Even Mr. Goldman, who walked with 2 canes and no patience, came and asked to sit by the peonies. Cassie hovered by the hydrangeas, waiting for her moment to stage a candid photo. But no ring light showed up. No friend with an iPhone and a flattering angle. No branded kombucha tower or flower wall arrived to help her build a caption. Evan was red-faced before the chicken salad made it to the table. "This wasn't the plan," he muttered. "It was mine," Helen said, adjusting a tray of cheese straws. A woman in oversized sunglasses leaned in toward Evan. "So you're the one moving, right? Everyone's been saying the house sold fast." He blinked. "Sorry, what?" "Oh," she said brightly. "I'm friends with Madeline. She said the transition was seamless. Thought it was so graceful letting the seller stay." Cassie spun around. "What do you mean, the seller?" But the woman was already asking Helen about the climbing roses. Guests took photos not of themselves, but of Helen's trellis, her bird bath, the bees she kept in the far corner of the yard. They asked questions about soil and sunlight. Someone asked how she trained her vines to bloom in tandem. Helen smiled and told them everything. She'd learned it all herself. No filters, no followers, just trial, error, and a willingness to stay rooted. Across the yard, Lena watched her mother standing beside a tray of untouched macarons, staring at her phone like it might rescue her. It didn't. And as the sun arced over the garden, the only thing trending was the truth. No one had come for Cassie. They had come for the woman who made things grow. The envelope arrived in a stiff legal blue, hand-delivered by a courier who didn't linger. It sat on the hallway console for 2 hours before Evan finally opened it. Cassie watching from the stairs with her arms folded tight across her chest like armor made from cashmere. 14 days, he read, mouth dry. They're actually kicking us out. Helen, in the kitchen, didn't flinch. She already knew. By the end of the week, a battered gray-moving van with dented side panels pulled into the driveway. The logo was half-faded. S&D Local Hauling. Joanne had recommended them. Trustworthy, no judgment, won't ask what you did to deserve it. She wasn't wrong. 2 men stepped out, one chewing gum, the other nodding politely toward Helen as she sat on the porch swing. A pitcher of sweet tea rested beside her, sweating in the sun. Her glass had a lemon wedge floating just right. Cassie came out the front door in oversized sunglasses and silence. Her mouth was drawn in a flat, practiced line that used to pass for composed. Evan trailed behind, phone in one hand, earbuds tangled in the other, already muttering about reels and spins and messaging the narrative. Helen watched them for a while, the slow spiral of cardboard boxes and cheap plastic bins they had bought to organize their lives now, loaded with things that never really belonged. From her chair, she could hear them muttering to each other. Evan cursed when one of the movers dropped a box marked guest room, linens. Cassie nearly shrieked when a flower vase tipped inside its bubble wrap cocoon. Lena sat on the steps a few feet away from Helen, shelling peas into a bowl. Her fingers moved steadily, her eyes tracking every wordless exchange. By late afternoon, the movers had started in on the second floor. Cassie came out again, this time with her sunglasses pushed into her hair and panic creeping through the edges of her voice. She approached the porch, stopped just short of the first step. "Mom," she said, voice shaking but measured. "Please, this is humiliating." Helen stirred the ice in her tea and looked at her. So was the broom. Cassie blinked, as if she'd been slapped. "You're seriously not going to let this go?" Helen tilted her head. "I let a lot go. That's the problem." Cassie's jaw clenched. "People are going to talk." "Let them," Helen said. "Just make sure they spell my name right." A silence fell like heavy dust between them. Then Cassie turned and walked back inside, shoulders squared but feet dragging. 10 minutes later, Evan emerged holding his phone like a badge. He angled it toward Helen, thumb hovering over the record button. "You don't mind explaining yourself to your audience, do you?" Helen didn't move. Lena stood before he could blink. She stepped between them, calm and unshaking. "This isn't your platform." Evan laughed nervously. "It's just content." "No," Lena said, voice steel-edged. "It's someone else's porch." He lowered the phone. Joanne called from her own yard. "Don't make me bring over my leaf blower, Evan." The movers didn't look up. They'd seen worse. By sunset, the van was full. Cassie walked out carrying a duffel bag that didn't zip properly. A curling iron hung out the side. She paused at the edge of the porch, her gaze grazing Helen's feet but never rising higher. "I really thought we were building something here," she whispered. Helen sipped her tea. "You were, just not with your own bricks." Evan slammed the van's back door shut with more force than was necessary. "We'll figure something out," he muttered. "I'm sure you will," Helen said. "Somewhere else." They got in the van. The engine coughed to life. Neither of them looked back. As the taillights disappeared around the corner, Helen stood and stretched. Lena reached for the tea pitcher. Joanne ambled over, hands on hips, a half smile tucked beneath her sunglasses. "You want me to sweep the porch?" she asked. "Just for symmetry?" Helen chuckled. "Leave it for tomorrow. Let the dust settle a little." Above them, the sky was turning that perfect Carolina blue-gray faded, steady, unapologetic. And in the driveway, only space remained. The engagement ring had always been too bright. Even when Evan had first slipped it onto Cassie's finger 3 months in, under the garden arch Helen built by hand, something about the way it sparkled felt borrowed, shiny in a way that didn't feel rooted. Helen hadn't said anything at the time, but she remembered the weight in her chest, the same one she felt when you hold something expensive that doesn't quite belong to the room it's in. Now, with the house empty except for her and Lena, the ring had reappeared left behind in a small ceramic dish on the windowsill of the guest bathroom. Cassie probably meant to grab it. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe it had become too heavy to carry. Helen picked it up and turned it in the light. It was showy, poorly set, and needlessly large, like someone had selected it through a filter. She slid it into a velvet pouch and placed it in her handbag. The jeweler in town didn't ask many questions. Helen had known him for years. He'd done the engraving on her anniversary watch, back when Bill was still alive. He studied the ring under a loupe, turning it once, twice, then again. "It's real," he said finally, "but low quality. Retail price was probably around 10 grand, worth half that on resale." Helen nodded, unsurprised. "Could you check the purchase history?" He gave her a curious look, but typed anyway. After a few quiet minutes, he frowned. "That's odd. It was purchased under a revolving credit line, linked to a Helen Ford at this address." He slid a paper toward her with the listed billing her old P.O. box, now long closed. Helen stared at the sheet, steady as stone. "Whoever opened it," he said carefully, "used your name and an alternate email. No backup verification. Just enough to slide through, if someone had access to old files or a birthday." Helen thanked him, paid in cash, took the ring back in silence. That evening, she called Baxter. His voice was clipped but calm. "Forgery, then?" "Yes," Helen said. "But I'm not pressing yet. I'll prepare the paperwork anyway. If it escalates, we're ready." "Thank you." She hung up, then retrieved a small wooden box from her armoire. The kind you'd keep wedding bands in. She lined it with tissue, placed the ring inside, and taped it shut. On the top, she wrote in clear black ink, "Return to sender." She left it on the hallway table, just inside the front door. She didn't have to wait long. Cassie returned 2 days later, alone, dressed in denim, and a white blouse that still had its boutique tag half tucked at the hem. Her makeup was clean, precise. Too precise for someone who claimed to be dropping by for one last thing. Helen didn't move from her chair in the den. "It's on the table," she called out. "Take it." Cassie picked up the box and didn't open it. She stood there for a moment, fingers grazing the edge like she might say something. She didn't. She turned to leave. As the door opened, Evan stood waiting on the porch. He looked thinner, quieter. Something in his posture had crumpled. Helen saw him glance toward the window, but never look her in the eye. Cassie joined him wordlessly. They walked down the steps together, neither speaking. At the bottom of the path, Evan said something's oft, short. Whatever it was, Cassie didn't reply. Helen stood and walked to the doorway, watching them from a distance. No need for confrontation, just observation. Lena came up behind her. "That the ring?" Helen nodded. "Charged it to my name." Lena frowned. "You going to press charges?" Helen watched as the pair disappeared down the sidewalk. No car waiting, no cameras, just pavement and silence. "Only if they come back," she said. She shut the door gently and locked it. Then she turned and walked toward the kitchen, the sound of the kettle whistling like punctuation. The air inside Baxter's office was still. Not stale, not cold, just still, the kind of stillness that held weight. Papers were stacked in crisp, silent piles. The pen lay waiting atop a thick folder with gold tabs and embossed letterhead. Helen sat on the same side of the desk she'd always preferred, left of center, facing the window, where she could see the parking lot oak casting shadows on the sidewalk. Baxter cleared his throat. "This confirms Lena Ford as full successor trustee and sole beneficiary of the remaining estate. House, contents, investments, mineral rights if you ever want to impress her with those." Helen smiled faintly. "She's more into butterflies than oil." He continued without missing a beat. "Cassie Ford has been removed from all beneficiary positions, retroactively. I've also added a line under power of attorney protections for your medical care, just in case." "And Evan?" Baxter reached for another file. He's already been flagged by 2 brokerages for misrepresentation on loan documents. His name now triggers a legal alert if he tries to claim familial right through marriage. I've got it locked down tighter than Fort Knox with better manners. Helen nodded once. Good. He passed her the pen. It moved steadily in her hand. No shakes, no hesitation. Just 3 clean signatures. 1 initial, a thumbprint seal. When it was done, Baxter closed the folder, tapped it twice like a gavel. It's done. Helen leaned back in her chair. Not to rest, to absorb. It was done. She told no one, except Joanne and Lena. Joanne came by that evening with a peach pie and a plastic fork stuck upright in the middle. For declaring independence, she said. No need for plates. Helen poured 2 glasses of red and handed over the folder. Joanne scanned the front page, then raised an eyebrow. Your bloodline's officially rerouted. Helen looked at her friend. I didn't do it out of spite. Joanne shrugged. Doesn't mean it's not satisfying. They clinked glasses, not to toast, but to anchor. Later that night, Lena found Helen in the garden, trimming the climbing roses before the next week's heat. You could have just left it in your name, Lena said softly. You didn't have to do this for me. Helen didn't look up. I didn't do it for you. I did it because of you. Lena frowned. Helen turned then, pruning shears in hand. You're the only one who saw me. Not what I represented. Not what I gave. Just me. Lena looked away, blinking fast. Still, it's a lot. So is inheritance, Helen said. You don't earn it in dollars. You earn it in empathy. The sun dipped behind the trellis. The email came the next morning. From Cassie Ford. Subject, just a thought. Hey, Mom. I know things have been tense. I guess I just wanted to say I hope one day we can fix this. I mean it. Maybe things got out of hand. Maybe we all made mistakes. But I still love you. And I hope you'll let me prove that. Eventually. C. Helen read it once, then again. No apology, no admission. Just a carefully vague reach for a rope she'd already severed. She hovered over the keyboard. Her cursor blinked in time with her heart. Then she closed the tab. No reply. No forwarding. No saving. Just delete. Click. Gone. That night, she placed the finalized trust documents in the fireproof box under the bed. The key now sat on Lena's keyring, alongside a charm shaped like a sunflower and a plastic grocery store, rewards fob. As Helen stepped out onto the porch, Joanne was waiting with 2 mugs and a newspaper folded under one arm. No headline, she said, handing Helen the tea. But it still feels like the front page, doesn't it? Helen nodded. Power doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just transfers. They sat quietly as the wind moved the porch swing. And in a small email account miles away, Cassie refreshed the inbox again. No response. Just silence. The kind that didn't bruise. The kind that closed. The folding chairs didn't match. Some were wood with peeling paint. Others were plastic with scuffed legs. One had a crack duct, taped at the corner, courtesy of Joanne's garage, but arranged beneath the shade of the flowering dogwood. They looked deliberate, like a circle of friends that didn't need staging. Helen and Lena had set the brunch table together just after sunrise. Nothing extravagant. A pitcher of orange juice with condensation down its neck, ceramic mugs borrowed from 3 different cabinets, a short stack of scones baked that morning, still warm. The place cards were handwritten, simple. Names only. No hashtags. By 10 o'clock, the backyard was full. Neighbors mingled beside the hydrangeas. Mr. Goldman grunted his approval over the rosemary biscuits. The twins from the garden plot brought seed packets tied in string. Miss Ross arrived with her rescue mutt in tow and told everyone how Lena had aced her final project. But mostly, the talk was of Helenoff, her soil, her roses, her unexpected storm weathering. You bounced back, someone said. Helen shook her head gently. I didn't bounce. I rooted. Near the trellis, Joanne set down a paper-wrapped bundle beside the lemon tart. It's nothing, she said, but also everything. Helen peeled back the paper. Inside was a small wooden plaque, etched in uneven script. Owner, not occupant. Helen traced the letters with one fingertip, eyes wet but unshed. Did you burn this in by hand? Burned the old labels off first, Joanne said, then made room for the one that fits. The sound of forks clinking and birdsong wove together in soft rhythm. Baxter arrived late, as always, holding a bottle of sparkling cider and wearing a tie that looked like it had been ironed in the car. He raised his glass after 2 sips. "To knowing when to close," he said, pausing, "and when to reclaim." Everyone raised their mugs and mismatched glasses. Even the wind seemed to pause to listen. Then Lena stepped forward, a folded paper in her hands. "I wrote something," she said shyly. "For Grandma." The yard hushed. She read slowly, voice steady but warm. "You taught me soil holds more than roots. It remembers. It keeps score in silence, then blooms anyway. You taught me home is not built in square feet, but in the inches we refuse to give away. You taught me age is not erosion, but weathering, and the strongest things are shaped by storms." Helen didn't speak. She just reached out, took her granddaughter's hand, and squeezed once. Lena leaned down, kissed her cheek. "Thank you for seeing me." Helen's voice was soft. "You saw me first." The crowd thinned as the sun began to dip. Napkins fluttered. The dogwood swayed. Helen sat alone for a while on the porch swing, the plaque resting on her lap. The air held no tension, no anticipation, just the quiet satisfaction of a chapter closed with grace. Inside the house, no raised voices, no clicking heels, no urgency. The past had packed its bags. Only peace remained. Lena came out with a tray of tea. "One more cup before we clean up?" Helen smiled. "Only if you let me wash the mugs this time." They sipped together in silence as dusk settled. And somewhere far away, a former inbox sat unopened. No new messages, no forward buttons, just pause. The kind that isn't empty, just earned. And under the porch swing, the roots held steady. The envelope was cream-colored. No return address. Just her name, penned in tidy, slightly slanted cursive Helen hadn't seen in years. Cassie's. It arrived tucked among the usual clutter. A coupon flyer, a dental appointment reminder, a seed catalog she still liked to flip through even if she ordered nothing. She knew what it was before she opened it. Not by the handwriting, but by the weight. Some envelopes carried apologies. This one carried suggestion. Inside was a photo. Helen, younger, seated in a lawn chair with a baby wrapped in pink fleece, sleeping against her chest. Cassie. The back of the photo read, "Summer, 91. First time she fell asleep on me." Helen turned it over again and looked into her own younger eyes. They looked tired, soft, hopeful. Tucked behind it was a folded card, the kind you'd pick up last minute at a grocery store rack. No flowers, no glitter. Inside, 4 words written in familiar ink. "You're still family. See." Helen sat at the edge of her bed for a long moment. Then she walked to her dresser, opened the second drawer, and slid the photo and card inside beneath a faded quilt square and the key to her old cedar chest. She didn't shut the drawer hard, just firm enough. The sky outside had turned the kind of gold that only visits quiet homes, not loud ones, not curated ones. She stepped onto the porch with her sun hat tucked low and the old watering can in her hand, the one with a dent from when Evan knocked it over unloading a patio heater she never asked for. The roses were leaning heavy in their beds, flushed with July color, as if even they knew the story was over and could finally rest. Helen moved among them slowly, giving each root its measure, letting the soil drink without rush. Lena appeared on the porch a few minutes later, carrying 2 tall glasses of lemonade balanced on a tray. She didn't speak, just set them down, kicked off her sandals, and took the seat beside the one Helen always used. Between them, the small wicker side table sat sun-warmed and slightly uneven. At its center was a ceramic coaster Lena had made as a school project years ago, glazed unevenly, the letters hand-stamped with care. "Homeowner since 1979. Helen smiled at it. Not the way you smile for company. The way you smile when something, finally, fits. They drank in silence for a while, the ice cubes clinking gently as the world turned at its own pace. A bee moved lazily from bloom to bloom. A wind chime gave a single note, then stilled again. Helen set her glass down and leaned back. "No more visitors today?" Lena asked. "No," Helen said. "Not the kind I let in." They stayed like that for a long time. 2 women. One line of legacy, drawn not by entitlement, but understanding. And in the drawer inside, the last card waited quietly, not framed, not posted, not even destroyed, just filed away. Because not all answers require rebuttal. Some things end in punctuation. Sunlight stretched across the porch, long and gold. No one was waiting to interrupt. No one rehearsing lines in the hallway. No one watching her with a script already written. Just quiet. Just place. Just earned space. Helen ran one hand over the grain of the swing's armrest carved by Bill decades ago, sanded by time, and now hers alone to rest against. She exhaled through her nose. Not tired, not regretful, just finished. And as Lena reached to refill her glass, Helen murmured, not loud but not hidden. She handed me a broom. A pause. I handed her the truth on paper in ink and under lock.